Yeah, I know. Yeah, I know. I'm really glad.
The military.
Yeah, I know. I know.
So,
Little pushes or.
Sometimes you're not
here,
so I will copy Deborah on it.
we get really
Wow. Wow.
And I'm gonna be. I will be. That's our spirit.
Are we ready? Let's get started, guys, so we can finish on time. Okay, everybody. I'm going to call us to order. It is now, let's see, 3:32, and we are going to get started with our Program Services Committee meeting. So welcome. Thank you to all of our members that are here with us today. With that, let's go ahead and call roll. And Ms. Clay, will you please take roll for us, please?
All right, roll. Dr. Glenn,
Present.
Carmen Connor, Daryl Jones, Liza McFadden, Mark O'Brien.
Present.
All members present.
All right, thank you so very much. All right, let's go ahead and get started. I would like for us to start with approving the agenda. I'm just going to briefly overview the agenda for everybody, just so you all understand what we need to accomplish before we leave the room today. And I know we don't have a lot of time, but I want to make sure everybody's clear what's going to happen. We're going to start first with an update from QQ Research. We have Dr. Williams on the line. She's going to talk to us about the draft programs inventories that are currently under view. And we're going to discuss what that version is currently looking like and how we can use that information that they're gathering to help us make decisions. So we're going to start with that. Then we're going to really review our aggressive timeline. It is beyond aggressive. I'm almost scared, but there's a lot that needs to happen in a very short period of time. And I think it's important for us to understand what that timeline is looking like and why the decisions that we're making need to be made in a timely manner. Then we need to make some key decisions. So today is decision-making day. So I hope y'all are decisive. And I am trying to make sure that we get through everything in this short period of time. The decisions that we need to make today are recommendations that we're going to take back to the council. And these recommendations are to help us figure out how we're going to operate the processes for funding. And we want to be able to get a handle on those things and make those recommendations. When we have our meeting next week, we can say, these are the things that we would like for you all to vote on. This is the process that we would like for us to undergo. So let me give you some examples of some of the things that we need to answer. Like, what type of procurement processes do we want to use with the funding option? So are we going to offer RFPs or ITNs or any other type of funding procurement process? We want to be able to answer that. Are we going to attempt to do funding in all of the priority areas at one time? Or are we going to strategically figure out what areas we want to fund first and then use a cyclic cycle to be able to fund those? So we need to make some decisions around that. Will we require a cost reimbursement for the programs that we fund? Or are we going to establish a mechanism to give them a percentage of the money up front? Like, generally, how do we want that to operate? Do we want to hold back a set amount or a percentage of the dollars that the commission or the council has to be dedicated for capacity building efforts? Is that something that's important to us? Do we want to set aside some money for that? Another question we want to answer, will we require all funded programs to be evidence-based programs, or are we going to allow a certain percentage of our budget to be set aside for emerging practices or innovative practices or innovative programs? So, we need to think through some of those things. How long will these contracts be for? Are we expecting the contracts to be 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years? These are some of the things I never really thought about, but we have to start making those decisions. Then the last question that we have on our list that I want to make sure we answer are, what are the specific accountability measures that are needed if we decide to do some of these longer contract periods? So if we don't want to go through this the contracting every year. We want to do longer periods of time. What are the measures that we want to put in place? Now, these are just the questions that we thought about. There may be other questions that come up. So I welcome you all to surface those questions. But remember, we got to come up with some answers because we got to take these recommendations back to the council next week. Now, to help us answer these questions, because honestly, I was overwhelmed just thinking through this. It's like, oh my goodness, this is a lot. We do have a special guest who is right here. This is Miss Michelle Watson. She's the CEO of the Florida Alliance of Children's Councils and Trusts. She has a lot of experience. She's done this with many different CSCs. So I'm happy that she's here to just tell us what works, what doesn't work, what works well, but she's going to help us make some of those decisions. So thank you very much for being here. And I look forward to hearing her presentation. Our goal, so before I let y'all out of the room today, and I know you have someplace that you need to go, we have to come up with some committee recommendations to answer these questions. So I want to have a set of recommendations of how we're going to structure our procurement process or our investment process, and then start putting those tools together so we can have everything in place to meet the timeline, which is already an aggressive timeline. So a lot of things need to happen quickly. So after we go through all of that, after we make our recommendations, then we will set our next meeting date. We will then have an opportunity for member comments, and then we plan to adjourn. So that's what's on our agenda. So do I have anybody who's willing to approve or make a motion to approve this? Awesome, thank you. She's seconded. All right, thank you. So it's been approved by Marco Bryant.
Motion made.
It was second, yeah, and it was second by Carmen, yeah, okay. I saw her motioning to me. Yes, ma'am. Yes. So that's a good question. Right now, both, but we don't have to make a solid decision. So when we look at the timeline, you're going to see what the timeline is for the expedited, and we're going to make some solid decisions for the expedited. We have a little bit more time for the future funding, and then we can say, we can't make the decision. Let's just make these decisions now for the expedited and hold off on the timeline, or we think our decisions are solid and we could use it across the board. That's still up for discussion. Does that make sense? Okay, awesome. All right, so we have an approved agenda. So everybody, and thank you very much for your question, Liza, Miss McFadden. I'm trying to be formal here. All right, so let's move on with our agenda. It is time for public comment. For those of you that are in the audience, if you would like to make a public comment, please remember that we welcome your comments. This is not an opportunity for you to engage the council members in conversation. This is not an opportunity for questions, but we would like to be able to hear the comments that you would like to make. Please make sure you have a card that is filled out, and you have to give it to Ms. Clay in order to be able to speak. So Ms. Clay, do we have any public comments? No, well, we went through all of that. We don't have any public comments. Okay, thank you very much. All right, we appreciate that. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started with our agenda. And with that, I would like to welcome Dr. Williams to the table. She is here with us via Zoom. Thank you so much for joining us. We are asking you to please provide for us an overview or an update of the needs assessment, the process that you all have gone through so far, specifically around the draft programs inventories, and anything else that you want to share with us. So Dr. Williams, I'll turn it over to you.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for having both myself and Dr. Lexi Romero-Rivera. So today, what I wanted to have a chance for us to share with you is just a draft. I want to say draft because we are still working quite hard on this deliverable. So I want to walk you through a little bit about the methodology for the program's inventory. So we relied on a number of sources to be able to identify organizations that potentially can be providing services to children, youth, families, both directly and indirectly. And we'll talk a little bit about that because I do have that question to pose you guys later to sort of get your feel and your thoughts. So first we began by really looking at a download of Irs data that indicated programs, organizations that are in Leon County that are currently funded through IRS, or they have an EIN number. So we started off, and that's a huge list. So what you'll find is that right now the database has, I want to say approximately, I'm looking at the cover sheet here. I feel like it's close to 2,000. It's a lot of organizations. So know that this number is going to decrease as we begin to sift through these organizations. There are some that may not necessarily provide services to children and families. There are some that, for example, we might find some that really doesn't connect or link to the type of programming or services that CSC is looking to fund. So I want to put that out there, that that number is going to decrease. And then the goal is to finally have a set of organizations and programs that provide services to children, youth, and families. So we have that source of data that came in. We also have data that came in through 211. So these are organizations for some of the partners that you guys have that are already listed under like a 211. We also had data that we received from some other partners. And so the goal was to get as many organizations that we can that can be linked to providing services to children, families, and youth. In addition to that, another thing that we did was connect with the Chamber of Commerce. And we did that for two reasons. One, there are some business owners that can potentially live in Leon County and could have some input as it relates to the needs of children, youth, and families, but also they can potentially be a business that can provide services to children, youth, and families. And so there's been a push to get a provider survey out to the Chamber of Commerce, out to current providers, out to for-profit providers, with the hope that they'll be able to complete this provider survey, where we're asking them some questions around, one, do you provide services to children, youth, and families? If you do, can you tell us a little bit about the target population? Can you tell us a little bit about the size of the organization, your capacity to do the work? So it's a number of questions that we're posing to potential providers in CSC, in Leon County, sorry. Next, I wanted to also share that I want to pull it up. Let me show you, and I don't want you to, because it's quite lengthy. Can you guys see my screen there?
Not yet.
Nope.
Okay, let me bring it up to the top here. Okay. So I just wanted to go over just a few of the columns. The entire database is not complete because we're still in that gathering data phase. And so as you see here, we do have whether
Dr.
or not—
Williams, we
Yes.
still can't see. It's
Oh,
still
okay.
not.
I am just talking. You guys
That's
can
okay.
see. There we go. How about now?
Okay,
Yes.
now we can.
Okay, you see the database?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. I'm gonna make it a little bigger because I know I
Thank
sat in that
you.
room and it might be difficult to see. There you go. Okay, so some of the things that we're looking, I won't go in detail because there are a lot of columns, but just to kind of give you a quick overview, their EIN number, whether or not they're in a database like 211, we're tracking those who have completed the provider survey and those who have not. Obviously, information around the organization, typical information that you would think of in terms of primary contact, organization, website. And then we're also looking to connect things like, I'm scrolling fast because this is mostly about the organization. This is where I wanted to bring you guys to. We're also looking to see what type of services are they providing. And then we're looking to connect and track in terms of the priority areas that CSC Leon have already approved. How are they connected to the priority areas? Do they provide services under mental health, physical health, housing? So we're doing that as well. One of the challenges that we are facing, let me just stop my screen for a second. One of the challenges that we are facing is really to get providers to complete the survey. And so we have really been thinking about and brainstorming how can we still connect this data with the providers and still be able to gather the information that we would like. So just to kind of give you an idea of some of the efforts. So they have received emails that's basically saying, we would like to learn more about your organization and the types of services that you're providing, if you're providing services for children, youth, and families, something around that language. And then we're asking them if they can, we do include some language around the benefits of providing their information in this survey. We do tell them that, we're looking to learn more about the folks that they're serving. And then we send that out, we wait, we track, we see who has responded. We then go back and we send them another email. Hey, we noticed that you maybe have started the survey, because we're able to track who has opened it, who has started it. And then we're just sending them another reminder. We noticed that you've started the survey. We're asking that you please continue. And then if they haven't opened it again, we're still going back. As a third measure, we're also looking to kind of go through that list. It is an extensive list. As we start to narrow it down and we know we have providers that are truly still operating and that are providing services to children, youth, and families. Once we really have that narrowed down, and they still haven't provided information as it relates to the survey, we're still making phone calls to see if we can get folks to participate. But I did want to pass it over to you, Lexi, because I know you've been working really hard with the team around some of the solutions in order to get that data that we need to really fill the database.
Absolutely. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. It's so great to see you all virtually. It feels like so long ago that I was actually in the room with some of you. So thank you for having us back virtually. As Sandra had shared, I've been working with our team to really go through this. We call it the CPI database, to make it as accurate and thorough as possible. And I'm also going to go ahead and share my screen. And so Sandra has mentioned a few of the solutions that we've been working for, and I would just like to echo her that this is definitely an extensive list right now. Some of the other databases that we've included have been from the DCF, which has over 180 childcare facilities, the Second Harvest Food Pantry list as well. So really trying to make that list as detailed as possible to be able to sift through it. And in this cover sheet that we provided, we wanted to really focus on the provider assessment responses. As Sandra had mentioned, one of the tools that we've been using is, of course, email, reaching out directly to the service providers. And we're able to do this through Qualtrics, where we have a database, and that's where we're able to track really the movement that we've seen. So we can see if an individual has opened it, we can see if they've partially finished it, if they've started it, if the email has been sent and they just haven't opened it. So being able to track this more minute data allows us to then send appropriate follow-up responses. However, we know that sometimes providers or individuals might have more tight security settings on their inboxes as well. So we also have an independent list where we're able to go ahead, download that, and send out individualized and personalized messages. Another tactic that we've been taking was to personally invite the providers who were gracious enough to attend in person or virtually for those focus groups and community forum sessions, to make a more personal invitation to those individuals. And so we're really doing a lot to track that and to try and get as many responses as we can. And then another piece that we're doing, as Sandra had mentioned, is within the database itself. With that IRI list, or excuse me, IRS list, as well as some of the other databases, sometimes we do not have an email address to even send the providers. So just to give you an idea, there's about 1,600 of those cases. And so what we've done as a research team is we go through individually, row by row, and we do public research. So we actually go, we try and find, based on the EIN number, based on the contact information, if there is any, like a name, based on the organization, and we do our best to fill in all of the pertinent information that we can, and to also source those emails. So again, that we can actually reach out to them and to create that provider, create that email to give them that provider assessment link. And as we're going through too, we're able to look for some of the services, kind of save the provider some of that work, and even start to link some of those priority area subdomains that Sandra had been talking about. And going beyond that, of course, you see this Excel version. Again, our final version will be an interactive dashboard. And so we're, of course, working with our platform team to make sure that our database is formatted correctly, we're coding it correctly, we're doing mock-ups to make sure that it's user-friendly. So there's definitely a lot going on here in the background, again, to make this as thorough and really meaningful as possible for all of you to make those decisions that you need to make. And I'll pass it back to you, Sandra.
Okay, I'm going to move quickly. Okay, I don't want to take too much time. So the other thing I wanted to share very quickly is the IPI, which is the Informative Programs Inventory. Here we go. Okay, so here for this database, we have 279 programs. And these programs have been categorized as it relates to priority area. They've also been categorized as it relates to evidence level. And so I think you might have in your packet where it talks about the different types of evidence level that we're looking at. Let me just kind of show you right here, whether it's evidence-based, promising practice, or research-based. And so this is another tool that you'll be able to use as you're thinking about what types of programming should we fund. You'll have a list of programs. And again, this is going to be in more interactive as well. You'll be able to say, okay, well, let's look at what evidence-based programming falls under healthy children, youth, and families. And you'll see a number of programs with a program summary, with the type of outcomes that they're working on. And so when we break that down, we have, I just took some notes here, we have about 217 promising practice programs, 30 evidence-based programs, 32 research-based programs. And then again, I mentioned that this is by priority area. We're gonna, again, include the subdomains, which altogether includes 8. So right now, what you see on your screen is by success in school, with 61 programs under success in school, 64 programs under healthy children, youth, and families, and then 154 programs under stable nurturing families, which includes 4 domains, if you remember, housing, and 3 others that has slipped my mind. But I did want to get a chance sort of to hear from you all. And I have one question and then I'll stop talking. My one question for you all that we've noticed is, as we're going through this list and we're actually receiving some feedback from folks we're sending the emails to, some of them are saying, well, I don't provide direct services to children. However, we provide advocacy services around children education. Would an organization like that be an organization that we would want to include in the CPI? So that's just one question I'm going to throw out there, but I'm going to stop and just kind of hear some feedback.
Okay. I do have another question. I do hear your question, and we're going to come back to answer your question. But I do want to ask one quick question, and then I'll turn it over to the other members to see if they have a response for your question, and then if they have any other questions. With the comprehensive programs inventory, it looks like the response rate is really not that good. I'm really concerned with the number of responses that we have. And so I guess my question is, what is your level of confidence that we will be able to get the information from these organizations to really have a comprehensive program inventory that displays what's actually available within Leon County? Do we have any, I know y'all are following up, but if they're not responding to the surveys, how will we get this inventory completed?
Yeah, so I think that's a valid question, because to be quite honest, we were nervous too. So each day we're like checking our system to say, do we have an increase? And so the strategies that we're implementing would include that outreach, would include some of the research that we're really doing just on our own research, looking up these organizations, looking at their websites. There have been some that we've been able to eliminate for the reasons of that they're not in existence anymore. For the ones that we do find information online, we're still trying to see what can we gather just from looking at their website. But I do want to say that it's the survey was, thank you for that comment. The survey was really a supplement to the work. And the survey is asking some more detailed questions. It's also addressing what do they think can be some of the needs. So I don't want you to think that the survey is the way we're doing this work. It really is around our desk research. It's around our looking, as Lexi mentioned, which takes time, but looking at from website to website, looking at the website, making phone calls, asking them information about their organization and the programs that they're providing. So I want you to think of the survey as a supplement to the work.
Okay,
I just wanted to add.
sure, please.
We're done.
Okay, is this thing on? What we have also discovered is that there are probably, how many, Holly? 4 different needs assessment surveys that are going out from different organizations, which we will look at as we move forward, because there's no reason for all of us to be doing all of these surveys at the same time. We literally just found out this week that there are about 4 of them that are out there. So we could also be dealing with a little bit of fatigue and a little bit of this one versus that one. Is this the CSC one? Is this I know Legal Services of North Florida has one that they've got going on. So that could be a little bit of an issue as well. I just wanted to add.
But all in this space, asking the same questions?
Not necessarily the same questions, but if they're all going to duplicate entities, that's what we could be running into.
Okay, Liza.
Going on?
It's on.
It is?
Yeah.
Okay, the green light's not on. So just a couple ideas. One is, I don't know if you've reached out to any, they are the group that coordinates all the nonprofits in Leon County. So I don't know if they could be helpful. Second, I did start the survey myself and stopped. And I'll tell you why. It was very, I thought, lengthy. So I was wondering if you've gotten a lot of responses about that, and if you've thought about if there's a way to shorten it, or, you know, if there's just kind of some key things. So that would be my second, you know, kind of question. And just the third idea was, do they get anything up front as a benefit? Like you're automatically joining the newsletter for CSC and you will know of grants as they become available. Is there something on the front end that makes me want to fill it out as a nonprofit? Those are my 3 points.
Those are, if I can respond, those are great points. And yes, in terms of reaching out to that first, I think the first entity you mentioned, I do believe we did do that. And the length of the survey is always a challenge, right? Because on the one hand, this is a one shot, you don't know how often you're going to be able to get these providers. And it's always a give and take. What we try to do is really negotiate how long we can make it. To your point, if you're a smaller organization, you might go through the survey fairly quickly. But we did work with some larger organizations that said, well, you know, Sandra, we provide a lot of programs and a lot of services. And so for those, we've, one in particular, what we had to do is say, okay, I know you provide a lot. So we're gonna kind of work with you on your particular link to see how we can make it more manageable so that you're not having to tell us about every single program. So we are trying to find ways to be flexible, as folks that have larger organizations might take a little longer. The incentive always works. And right now, you know, the benefit, the way we sort of worded the benefit is really letting them know that we're trying to get a sense of the lay of the land around programs. And we want to be able to include the work that you're doing if you're doing work with children, youth, and families. But if there is another way to incentivize them, as you mentioned, for example, including them in a newsletter, I think that's great. I think any way that we can incentivize them to complete it would be great. The other thing I wanted to add is that although, you know, our goal is, again, to get as much data to make this as comprehensive as possible, with the survey helping and adding to it. It doesn't mean that it has to end, you know, once, you know, folks can continue. We can think about how can we continue to allow folks to still complete the survey as time goes along. So you might want to think of strategies where, you know, if folks may be interested in engaging in conversations around how they could offer their services, maybe there might be a way to say, okay, that's great. We would love to learn more. Have you completed the survey so that we can just learn a little bit more about your organization? These are just some suggestions to piggyback on what you just said.
Dr. Williams. Okay, you have a question?
Just a quick one. Does the survey capture incomplete surveys?
It does.
It does.
Yeah,
It does.
it's in your packet. If it's
Okay, I
in your
missed
packet,
that.
right, that information should be good. Dr. Williams, thank you so very much. I appreciate you taking the time, and also Lexi for providing this overview. We do have to move forward because unfortunately we have a packed agenda. We did not answer your question, and I'm very much aware of that, but we will work with the staff to make sure we get back to you. So you will not go unanswered, for that particular question. But we appreciate your time. Thanks for the update. And we look forward to seeing the completed inventories. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Have a good one, everyone.
You're welcome. Thank you.
So, Dr. Glenn, if I may.
Yeah, please.
One of the things that I was hoping, something to think about directly related to your question, Ms. McFadden, and that we can think about as you move forward in these next series of questions, is part of the contracting experience or the RFP experience, or however we want to call it, that one of the some of the requirements be that they complete that organizational profile. So in kind of our discussion, and Dr. Williams talked about this very briefly, is this idea that the database is our tool, that even though they're going to produce this dashboard for us, we get to then keep it and have access to it and the ability to add additional profiles to it. So this is my really messy notes from handwriting at our lunch the last time, but in essence, thinking about 3 different ways that you might want to consider adding into the contracting process is that an entity to receive or to apply for funds or be eligible for funds must complete that organizational profile. They must identify or self-identify with at least one of the subdomains that their program services that they're applying for is related to. And they must also be willing to collect data, individual or impact data using one of the research-based tools that we've included it in our other profile in the KOMs.
Yeah.
So at least one, right? We're not saying that it has to be all of them or any of them, but at least one. So that's something that you might want to consider putting forth as parameters as we move forward.
That's a huge incentive to me. You will not be considered for funding unless you do complete the survey and it's a part of our inventory moving forward. Any other comments regarding that?
I like that idea. I would just say, for example, if one of the first things we put out is a PR campaign, the people may or may not fit the program profile. So I think you're going to have exceptions to that. Or I would hope we would make exceptions, not make it a requirement, but it's seen as a benefit. Or, profile that you fill out, but when you say matches, it may or may not always match.
Directly. Okay, thank you for that. Okay, let's go ahead and move forward. I do want us to have an opportunity to have some of these discussions. And so what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to turn this over to Holly and Sika, or Ms. McPhail and Ms. Green, who are going to talk to us a little bit about other funding agencies in Leon County and what their approach is to grant making. So Holly's going to talk about United Way, Sika's going to talk about the CSP, and I think it's good for us to hear what those organizations are doing, and then we'll roll into the presentation from Ms. Watson, who will talk about the other CSCs. So let's see, Holly, let's start with you.
Yeah, so actually in the audience, we see the president and CEO of the United Way of the Big Bend.
Okay.
And so I know we are putting you on the spot. Well, there we go. And so we're going to ask Bernice Cox to come up and just give us a very quick overview of how the United Way of the Big Bend does their funding cycle.
Perfect, thank you.
Yeah. And I know I put you on the spot, but that's what we do.
Thank you very much. And I've been on the spot before, just like you, Sika. So, and thank you all very much for the opportunity. I think I'm thanking you for the opportunity today. I'm Bernice Cox. I'm the president and CEO of the United Way of the Big Bend. I want to make sure that I respond to exactly what you want me to do. An overview of our allocation process. Okay. I do want to go back to Sika, Holly, and committee. We are finalizing our survey. For some reason, we just got the survey link. It was in a junk spam folder. So we just got that a couple of days ago. So we have not submitted that yet, but we're working on that. There will be some questions that we have in order to move forward on that. But yes, we are working on ours. So as we look at the allocation process, for our dollars, our campaign dollars, are dollars that are coming from businesses in the community, from individuals in the community, corporate donations, government agencies, a combination as far as our campaign dollars. So I'm going to speak specifically to the allocation of the campaign dollars. We send out a call for a letter of intent to all agencies in the Leon County area. And then it is posted, it is sent to UPHS, it is sent to NEs, to CHSP, and then it's posted. It has a notice, a public notice. And in that letter of intent, it's a brief letter of intent. We ask the agencies to let us know the program that they want to be funded within their agency. We fund programs, not agencies. And so we ask them to let us know the program that will be funded. We also ask for an updated audit. We need to have an idea, because we want to make sure our contributors and donors really want accountability. And so we want to assure our donors that agency that oversees that program will be sustainable and will be there and to be able to actually implement the program, and will be there 3 to 5 years. Our funding is a 2-year funding cycle. And so that is factored in as well. So we have a financial review team that is made up of volunteers, and on that financial review team are CPAs or financial advisors or experts in the financial industry. They're bankers that make up that team. They review those letters of intent, and then those letters of intent go to another volunteer committee that has the opportunity to hear what the recommendations are being made. And from that, we have 3 volunteer committees that actually go through the process before it is actually approved by the final committee to say they can be open for applications. Just like, I mean, staff has no decision-making in that process. We just move the process forward after volunteers have reviewed. Then we open up for applications, and the application is in a portal. So we have our portal that those agencies that want to apply can apply in. And we have 5 impact areas. As we've looked at the root causes of poverty, we went through a strategic plan a few years ago and came up with the 5 impact areas. And that's through housing, that is housing that includes anywhere from shelter for families and children and for individuals, to transitional living, to rental assistance, all the way to that family getting their first home. It is in skills development. We want to make sure we partner with Career Source and Tallahassee Community College and Lively Tech, and of course the Leon County Schools. But we want to make sure that those individuals that need additional skills, perhaps they didn't complete their high school or don't have their GED or didn't have any kind of post-high school education, that they can get the skills to be able to take care of their families. So we fund in that area as well. In early learning, from 0 all the way up to teens. We fund in early learning, making sure that we're impacting those children. In health and mental health. Health and mental health is another important area. So health and mental health, as you know, the microscope with COVID-19 has been put on health and mental health. So that is another they can apply for. And then of course, safety net. That is your food, that is 211 Big Ben, that's Refuge House. Those are just some examples of some of these programs. So they apply in those impact areas. After they have applied, we review that. Staff, of course, reads the applications, but then those applications are reviewed by volunteer teams. We're in an 8-county region. I'm going to be specific to Leon County. I think you'd probably prefer that, yeah. Madam Chair, am I correct?
Yes.
So we then have a volunteer team that reads every application and goes through all those applications. And then we have a volunteer committee that then they actually get together and actually deliberate over those applications. And that is a long day and a half, sometimes two, I don't think we've seen it more than 2 days, where they deliberate over that. And then it goes through 3 more committee processes for approval. And then the allocation letters are sent. One other addition, other than just receiving the applications, is through that portal, we ask our funded partners to do quarterly reports. And so in that quarterly reports, that allows us to see how they are impacting the area that they said they would be impacting with the programs. You know, the individuals they're serving, We look at the demographics of the individuals they're serving. We want to make sure that those dollars are being spent the way we're being told they're being spent. And also it allows for us to collect the data in order to tell our community and to let our donors know just how that money is being spent.
I do have a quick question for you. With those quarterly reports that they send into you all, how do you all follow up to ensure that, is there someone that reviews those reports
Yes.
and then follows up with them to ensure that everything's okay?
We have a vice president of community impact that's her title, that's responsible for that.
Okay.
We try not to have to do this, but if we have to hold payment, those quarterly reports allow us to actually sometimes have to hold payment until some of those services are provided, because we're trying, again, the donors want to make sure that their dollars are being spent wisely and are actually being used the way they should be used. And there's the allocation process. We have our own, and I'm going to get off. We have our own programs that we oversee: Reading Pals, Math Pals, Smile United, and Volunteer Income Tax Assistance. So those are United Way initiatives that we see. I hope that's been helpful.
Very.
Yes, I was on the spot, but I hope I would have been more thorough if I could have done a presentation, but I hope that's.
Before you go, I think Liza has a quick.
I just wanted to compliment United Way on something that I know helps the local nonprofits hugely, and that is that you give your money out on a monthly basis, certain day of the month. They don't have to wait and get on reimbursements like they do for the state. And it's absolutely a huge deal. So thank you for that.
Thank you very much.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you for that. Thank you very much. We appreciate that, especially on the last second. So thank you for that.
So I will go. Bernice, thank you so much. And I know that was on the spot. So the CHSP staff, Abina and Shinkton, did the presentation. And so I'm going to run through this, just some highlights. If you need a review, we have the recording. So they have 11 funding categories. They fund 50 agencies, 84 programs, and of that, about 67% are for children, youth, and families. Of that, they do a 2-year funding cycle, but they recertify every year. So you only sign a year's contract, but every year they recertify to make sure you've got your documents in, 990s, audits, anything else, the state of Florida ability to do business, all of that stuff. They issue all of their categories at the same time. So they open that funding cycle for all the categories, all 11 categories at the same time. And their fiscal year is the same as ours. So it's that October 1 through September 30. They issue on a quarterly basis. There is a quarterly reporting process that's done. So you get your quarterly report in. If it's accepted, then the money goes out. At the end, they do a reconciliation. And if you didn't spend all the money, or if they determine that you spent it on an area that was not in the budget that you presented, they ask for that back and they recoup it at the end of the year. The review process is through CRTs. So this Hello. Okay, let's try that. I don't know what that was about. The CRTs, citizen review teams, it's anywhere from 96 to 119 citizens, all professions, all stands in life. They create teams, multidisciplinary, to review specific categories of the applications. And those teams do everything. They get the entire application. It's all done online in their portal. And that portal is also the reporting portal. So it's very similar to United Way of the Big Bend, just more categories. And then the funding can also be issued on a monthly basis. So at one point they were letting agencies choose how they wanted to get the funding. So I think that's a quick down and dirty on CHSP.
I think one of the differences is they do allow an advance of money for the nonprofits through the city and county, which is very helpful to nonprofits. And I think we might want to consider that on some of the grants or contracts.
They advance money. There we go. Okay. The CSC, they advance money, but United Way does it on a reimbursement process. Is that, did I not understand that? No.
Right, monthly.
It's not really a reimbursement, it's an allocation. That's just a monthly allocation.
Monthly
they get.
allocation, okay.
And one other thing that I failed to say is part of that review process, we have program evaluators that are volunteer program evaluators that are so in social work and psychology, et cetera, that also in social work and in statistics that also review our applications to make sure, because we're looking at measurable outcomes, they also review our applications for that as well.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Thank you very much for that summary. Okay, so if we don't have a whole lot of time, but I want to make sure we have an opportunity to hear from Ms. Watson. I want to give her an opportunity to share with us her experiences, what she's learned, what you've seen, what works well, what doesn't work well. We're interested in hearing that, so please.
Thank you. I'm going to join you all because the answer is not easy.
Okay.
You know, you are numbers 12 and 13 of children's services councils around the state. And there's been many different approaches. And what I think that you all will see over time is even your approach is going to be iterative, right? You've already figured out how do you expedite funding and then how do you move full circle. So I think one of the things that you all have done really, really well and smart is looking at what is the available programs in your community right now that would be ready to get funding on day one. And I think that you all have already set your priority areas, right? Whether it be strengthening, after school summer programs, early learning. And so what I've done is I kind of put together a one-pager and a background, as well as brought some materials for you to look at from Broward County, just as a nice snapshot. So one, you will kind of see their program services directory, which is a list of all of their funded programs under their priority areas. So I think that that's a really important comment, right? That just because you're looking at family strengthening, at any given time, family strengthening could be a maternal depression support program, right? It could be respite care for families. It could be expungement to help fathers be more integrated in their child's life, right? Those types of things can all fall under the program service area of family strengthening. But what you may see when you receive your final database of programs is where you have gaps, right? You're going to see where you have immediate opportunities and gaps. And so one of the things that our Children's Services Council always take approach to is they basically have three guiding principles, right? Is there a need in whole or in part in the community, right? Is there an identified need that is not being met? Is there a process in place to measure, collect program outcomes and service outcomes? And that really can take some time. And so how long will that take is also another question that you need to be prepared to answer. Is a 3-year contract long enough to really get those program outcomes that if it's evidence-based or research-based, right? If the efficacy is not going to be seen for 5 years, you know, to say you're going to get a 3-year contract becomes really difficult. And then what will the CSC be able to show as their return on investment? What are the taxpayer dollars that says this was a good investment? We are seeing actual movement in this area that we've identified as a need. So I think that while you all are looking this year, I think you can probably touch every priority program area. The question is that how far are you going to really be able to build it out this first year, right? Your program services guide might show under family strengthening only 3 programs this first year. It doesn't mean that that's where you're going to end up. It might be where there is a nice match between the programs that are available, that are ready and on deck, ready to receive funding, and the area of focus that you're really wanting to look at. With that being said, you'll also notice that in the approaches, I also put capacity building as an area for funding. Those are going to be programs that are not quite ready, right? They might not have an audit. They might not have the infrastructure that is ready to receive these dollars, but they are in communities doing really good work and they have a lot of interest in how they can participate. And so capacity building is a huge part of that. So one of the things I think is really important is as you're looking at program areas, you need to figure out what you actually can accomplish and accomplish well, right? How many areas within family strengthening based on your needs are you really able to put an RFP out on the street or an ITN and or both? And the reason why I say and or both is because you might know, I'm going to use the Early Learning Coalition for an example, just because my background's early learning. The Early Learning Coalition has a wait list. You want to get those children off the wait list and into high quality early learning. That is a one-to-one match, right? That is a request for proposal. Let us know how much it will cost. You're going to provide them a subsidized childcare voucher where they can access high quality. That's easy, right? Mm-hmm. The second is, what if it really is around your Teen Baker Act rate, right? You know, you have a huge list. Who can do that work? How quickly can they scale? What does that look like? What would, if their hands weren't constrained to maybe some federal and state regulations where they usually get their normal funding from, they had the ability to be innovative. Mm-hmm. What would they do? And that might be an ITN, right? They might really want to come together and say, we've always wanted to try this. This is something that we feel that other communities have done, or if we just were able to tweak these little pieces and parts, we think we would be able to have a much more significant impact. And so I think that, you know, for the expedited funding, there is truly one set of conversations to happen. And then for the long-term funding, it is going to be a completely separate set of those conversations. And so with that being said, is the delicate balance of letting your providers know, right? Just if you did not get this first round of funding, please know that this is not where this funding ends, right? Here are the opportunities. Here's how you get ready. Those types of information. What I would say is most of our CSCs offer 3-year contracts with the ability to do 2 one-year renewals. And that really is more for capacity building and scaling. We know that some programs, depending on how much money they get, they're going to have to hire new staff. They're going to have to train new staff. They're going to find participants if there's not a wait list. And that can take all the way anywhere from 9 to 12 months. So their first year is really doing that capacity building. And if they're really showing you that based on their application, that it's going to be 3 years to get to outcomes and evidence-based measures, you might want to go ahead and say, we're going to use at least one of those 1 year. The other is knowing staff limitations, right? Like you don't have a million folks. And where I think the Children's Services Council's community can be really helpful, right? As long as there's not a conflict of interest, is helping you review that review process. But the actual contracting process, right? What does that look like? When are you going to give, how are you going to give the data? When are you going to give the data? What system are you going to use? Those types of things. That takes time. Mm-hmm. And you also want that contracting process to be really high and tight, for a better word, because you want them to have a good experience in working with the council, right? The last thing you want is, how many times have you heard that getting federal grant dollars is a nightmare? Mm-hmm. And it's because it's not a good experience. It is really difficult. And so figuring out how you build those collaborative relationships within your community with those partners. And I know that that takes time and that takes staff. So what I would say is, I think you all are getting the baseline, and it's kind of the big globe right now. And then you guys need to narrow and narrow and narrow and see who really has within those providers, who's ready, who's really ready. I think what you also need to do is take an inventory of who is now receiving a lot of federal dollars from the American Rescue Plan and those funding streams that is kind of laying over the need right now, that we know when those dollars liquidate, depending on when that timeline is going to kind of unmask a whole new need that you might not see in your data that you're looking at today. Yeah. And so I think it's really important to ask those questions as well. How much federal dollars are you getting? When will it liquidate? How many families or children less would you serve? What is the impact of that? Because there might be some sustainability funding that might just need to be put aside in an effort not to shock the system when all of those federal dollars pull out.
Can I ask a question? I'm sorry.
Of course.
So we're in the process of building our comprehensive programs inventory right now. Do you suggest we include questions like this as a part of that? I know they've already started the process, but as they're building that, are these, okay, they're already there. I just want to make sure.
They are definitely part of that survey.
Okay.
And so I was just texting Sandra to find out if she's still listening. But it is part of that and will be part of the gap analysis report that they present in April.
Just wanted to confirm that. Okay, thank you.
Absolutely. And then there's things that are going to happen annually, right? Just because they're a much more transient program type. So you'll see that I made an asterisk around summer programs. Summer programs are not usually static as far as their locations, what families they're serving, where they have access to campuses, if they're, utilizing a school campus as their infrastructure. And so summer camps in your community that's most like yours, so St. Lucie, for example, they look at their summer camp portfolio every year because they just want to make sure that there's coverage throughout the areas in their community that really need access to those services. So they open that portfolio up every year because they know that that is one that changes. After school tends to have a lot of changes as well for some of the same reasons, right? Is the school going to allow the after school program to operate there? What is the bus route system? What are the traffic patterns? All of those, how many new students are coming into that school and is there enough capacity? Those types of things tend to be a lot more fluid than some of your other program areas. So I would say, even if you do allow for a 3-year contract, I would think there's going to be much more movement in the after school and summer space than even in some of those other spaces. Sure. And that's where you all as a council will really have to figure out over time. I mean, it's not going to be perfect, right? Over time, what does this look like? And that's why the partnership aspect of, yes, you have a contract and yes, we expect you to deliver, but it really is a partnership. How can we make sure that services are utilized? The last thing you want to do is be really excited about funding, funding mental health supports, and then nobody's taking advantage of those, right? What is the reason for that underutilization? Is it a trust issue, right? Is it a location issue? Is it an hours issue? And those are all things that you have to work through as a community until you get to the kind of this well-oiled service portfolio, which, you'll see 20 years, right? This is 20 years in the making. This is not year one. And so I think what I also want to say is, yes, I think there's a lot more information and a lot more support than even when Broward started, right? At that point, there was only 3 children's services councils that we can help give you all, as well as giving you examples of RFPs that have been successful in our communities, giving the scoring protocols, right? ITNs around some of the same issues you see so that there's a good framework. But I think that you all will really have to figure out that it's going to be an imperfect science, and really determining on the accountability front, right? When is the time to allow providers to provide services, and then how long before there's no movement, right? Yeah. I think it's really important when they come and they talk about their programs and they talk about their impact and their results, it has to be measurable outcomes. If we know that early learning is an 18-year long game and some, because we gave them access to high quality early learning, you can't just say after 3 years, we're not ready. And so I think that that's really important because it is an exercise in patience when you deal with youth programs. Sure. You don't know the impacts of a lot of those programs for a while, and some you get real-time and data and information. And then you have to determine if the efficacy is as long as you want. So there's amazing programs that happen throughout the state that work with families on parenting skills because they're known to the child welfare system. And their measure of success is they have no other integration or experience with child welfare for 2 years. Right. And so in the history of a child's life, you have to decide, is 2 years what we want? What would happen? What would 5 years look like, right? What would, 16 years look like? And it's kind of one of those things that when you're thinking about 2 years, is 2 years better than where you are now? If it's not the promised land, how do you work with that provider to develop that program and make it really meaningful? Because over time, it's through these continued investments that will relate to the large collective impact, right? Not these one and dones. And I think that is why this is such an exciting time for Leon. I think that there's a lot of funders that have money and they fund programs for 3 years, and right as the program's about to hit their stride, the money's gone, and they're like, but we're finally getting to outcomes. We're finally getting to really good measures. And I think that this is where with an exercise in patience and a really strong infrastructure for accountability and outcomes, this is why the Children's Services Council and/or trust model has been so well received, because it continues to refine, it continues to make tweaks, it continues to move forward. And I think that that's what you all will have to experience as your community grows, as your community builds relationships with this council, and as your providers get more of the supports that they need to come to the table with an infrastructure that's ready to provide services. Because we all know that in our communities, we have our elders, right? That everybody listens to. And the minute those elders are on board and ready, and everybody will come, right? If you build it, it will come. And so I think that that's what's really important, is the relationships, the funding. I've never seen anybody regret taking their time and doing it right. I've seen a lot of people regret rushing and then having it not have it, and then you're having to reset that tape.
Sure.
And so I think there is a delicate.
Thank you very much for that. I don't mean to cut you off.
You're fine.
We will lose him in a few minutes. So I do want to make sure we have an opportunity to go through some of these questions. I invite you to stay here at the table,
Okay.
because we're about to have some serious conversations, and I want your experience and your expertise to help us as we kind of resolve some of these things.
Absolutely.
Thank you. All right. I really appreciate
No
that.
problem.
Holly, before we get into these questions, I'm going to give you -2 seconds to go through the timeline. I do want the committee members to see what we have to do by when, and then if we could start tackling some of these, please. Okay.
Okay, I'll do that. I was really just coming up to grab my flash drive. But in essence, when we were talking and putting together the needs assessment originally, we said that we had 2 funding cycles that we would like to do in an ideal world. One is that expedited funding, which we put in as funding options A into the needs assessment process. And in order to have funding on the streets with this year's fiscal dollars this summer, we would need to release that RFP or whatever we want to call it right after our April meeting, leave it open, procurement law says, for 21 days, have that due on May 13th, which gives us just over 2.5 weeks to turn something around for an executed contract for June 1st, which is why we're having these conversations about methodology, about approaches, things like that. The other thing that you'll kind of just see on this, and I'm happy to share this with everybody in their email so you can kind of go through all the little steps about boilerplate contracts, provider relations guys, where does the capacity building and training come into it? When should we host what we call a bidders conference, which is in essence just a training? When do we recruit those review panelists? Who are those review panelists? All of that has to kind of be layered in on everything that you see here. Then if we turn around and want to have, and that was more for those shovel ready, potentially RFPs that Ms. Watson was talking about, maybe a campaign that Ms. McFadden mentioned, what does that look like? For the longer term impacts, if originally we talked about wanting to have that operationalized by October 1, and those will likely be more in depth, probably in IT, closer, I'm guessing, maybe, depending upon your council and ITN process. If we really want to get that out, we would want to release that probably in no later than middle of to late June. We'll have our final report and our final presentation of everything that we're doing for the needs assessment at that presentation in June. And ideally, if we wanted everything to kind of work, we might need to not only approve that, but also kind of that boilerplate ITN, RFP, whatever that's going to look like. But fortunately at the meeting in May is where we're really going to be talking about the issues and identifying that gap analysis and diving deep into that. So then that would have that RFP and or ITN, whatever you guys decide, due July 22nd. Give us a little bit more time. We built in 4 to 5 weeks for that review process because of if you do opt for an ITN, that would give you more time instead of the 2.5 weeks I mentioned earlier, to kind of go through all of that, finalize data expectations, provide that trainings to make sure that that accountability structure is in place, do the necessary training for expectations for those providers and or vendors that we're going to bring on to prepare those contracts for execution October 1. I know that wasn't -2 seconds.
It was
but-
-2 seconds. And I hope it made sense. The moral of the story is we don't have time. You know, that's the message that I want everybody to understand. A lot of decisions and we have to move quickly. One of the major things that I took away from Ms. Watson is that we need to be flexible in some of our decisions that we make, and to take our time, do it right, and build an infrastructure that really allows for these programs to be successful. So with that, I do want to go through some of these questions. Holly, will you pull them up, please, on PowerPoint? And if we could just, you know, kind of go through some of these and make some decisions around some of these things. We do want to take these recommendations to the full council. So the first question is, what type of procurement process do we want to use? RFPs, ITNs, and what I heard from Ms. Watson is we want to keep it open to do both, is what I'm hearing. Okay. One other thing that I want to ask before I come to you, do you think it would be reasonable for us to say for the expedited funding, we want to focus more on the RFPs because it's short term, there's specific things that we want, and then use either RFPs or ITNs for the longer term funding? Or do you still think that for the expedited funding, we keep it flexible with both? I just want to get you to respond to that.
So what I would say is, and I think you all saw me scribble a note to Sika, is obviously with that timeline, right?
Yeah.
You're completely missing summer programs.
Yeah.
And so one of the questions is instead of, taking a bite of the full hog, would you want to test some of this process on the summer programs with a one-year contract that would then make sure that children have access to summer programs, and then continue this kind of in a parallel cycle? What I would say about the RFP versus an ITN that is used in a few communities is when you do the RFP, you are absolutely responding to the core requirements of the RFP for consideration of the bid. If you think that you want to see some innovation, I would add a section of that RFP that allows them to explain what they would do if they had the ability to use these dollars in a more flexible way, but yet, at least you're getting a response to the core requirements. And have that potentially be in the scoring system, maybe just a lesser value moving forward. I would also say for the expedited funding, since that timeline is really aggressive, you might not want to go with a 3-year contract, right? You might want to go with a 3-year contract, but each year is renewable with a budget, a different budget, and what that work product looks like, which does not cut down on the work for your staff, by the way, right? It just increases the work. But obviously, I think that, unless these, hear the term shovel ready, right? And unless it's like my example of an early learning coalition, right? Like, we're giving you dollars, you're putting these children in care, they're going to be in this high quality care. This is where the dollars go, and that infrastructure is there. I think it's going to be really, really hard to bet on providers for 3 years when this is still just all coming together.
Sure. Okay, that's valid. Thank you for your response. Ms. McNeil.
I was going to say yes, and I am with the expedited process. I'd like us to consider prize money. I think it would be a really big
Prize
deal.
money?
Yeah.
Just explain.
So I don't know how many of you are familiar with the X Prize, and it was called the X Prize because they didn't know how much money they were going to be able to give away.
Yeah.
But it was created SpaceX. How does private company get man on the moon, right? And they put down a $10 million prize, and all these people built their machines, and basically now we have private folks being able to go. And when I was with the Barbara Bush Foundation, I'm not saying to put this much out, but we did a $7 million prize for whoever anywhere in the world could build the best app to teach literacy to adults online. And it, now has really helped hundreds of millions of people to access literacy programming for free. So I'm a big believer because teams get together and they don't necessarily have to be nonprofit people. They can be nonprofit plus business and whatever, and they try to solve some big problem. And I remember Jack coming to us at one of our very first meetings and saying, do not forget the power of people and volunteerism. And I just wonder if we had a big X prize or prize of some type for the best volunteer thing, we could move really quickly, right? What if every kid in a summer program had a mentor?
Okay.
You know, I'm just throwing out one idea, but so I would like to say RFP, ITN, and
prize. as an
prize
option.
money
Okay.
as options.
Okay, so flexibility and you're proposing this for both expedited and long-term, or are you speaking primarily for expedited?
I would say for both.
Both
I think
groups, okay.
it kind of goes to your social innovation question at the end, but I'm also more of a fan of the ITN and the RFP process because I think you get to negotiate, and I think it's good to have that flexibility.
Yeah.
And with ITNs, if 3 people bid and you actually like all 3 and you want to bring them together, as
Can
you
do it.
know,
Yes,
you can,
we can,
and you can
right.
do a lot more with an ITN than you can with an RFP.
Okay, I love your comments. Thank you. Anybody else have any thoughts about that? Okay, so what I'm hearing, if you can type this in, so we're considering for both the expedited and the long-term, we want to keep on the table RFPs and ITNs as a flexibility, and then the option of providing prize money to give people the flexibility to be innovative and bring to the table the best ideas that they can bring. And I love that. Okay. Okay, all right, no worries. Okay, perfect. Okay, wonderful. Thank you very much. All right, let's go to question number 2. Will we accept to put some funding towards all priority areas or take a more targeted approach and stagger the RFP funding cycle? I would like to give you an opportunity, just comment briefly, what seems to work best with the organizations, the CSCs that you've worked with?
I think you all need to figure out your provider inventory and capacity.
Okay.
Capacity is huge. I think that if you go out and put RFPs out for every targeted approach and your response rate is really low, then it sends a message that the services aren't needed. And that's not the case, right? It's probably the fact that they need to learn more. There has to be building that relationship. I would figure out what are your highest need areas, how do you really develop that, and then figure out a really thoughtful cycle. It's not saying that you don't all priority areas, and maybe it's just one within a priority area. Your priority areas are huge, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like to say like all priority areas and to have it look like this, you know, yours might look like one under each because they're ready. But other than that, I think it's how you define priority area and how you defined targeted approach, that it's really the terms of art that you're using versus what you really want to fund.
Yeah, that's a good point. My take on that is I think it depends on our gap analysis. You know, once we get the gap analysis, we could see where the biggest holes are and what is really needed in the community. And based on that, we prioritize. And if there are 3 big holes, then we need to tackle all 3. But if there's one hole that's bigger, then we can prioritize as that area. I'd love to hear from
I
you.
was going to actually comment on that as well. Until we have the needs assessment, it's really hard to understand what our
Yeah,
needs are and how deep the concerns might be within each of those fields. But I do think we need to recognize that our funding opportunities, and you know, we can look for partnerships and other things, but as far as the tax dollars that roll in, it's a really limited amount.
Right.
And so as a result, I think just by the nature of that, we would be smart to start off with a more targeted approach.
Okay.
And then evaluate as we move on what our capacity is through partnerships, et cetera.
Okay.
But my first initial thought was, let's get the needs assessment and really understand that, and then take more of a targeted approach, at least on the front end.
okay, valid point.
I totally agree with Mark. I just want to I want to add on to his thoughts with 2 points. Number one is I was on a continuum of care call today where literally the providers are talking about how they could possibly expend all the housing money. Like there's so much they can't. And that's true in a couple of other areas, right? So I think this is a different time because of all of the money from the federal government, and we need to be very thoughtful about some priorities. I would also say though, that given what I've heard so far from coming out of the focus groups, it may not be an either or. It seems like early on, we talked about the need for people to know the resources that are out there. So maybe it's, you know, a PR campaign that touches all and just lets people have access to everybody. And maybe it's also, I think we had a lot of conversation earlier about, I can't remember what you guys called them, but they were like liaisons that held people's hands to get them to navigators.
Yeah.
So maybe the navigator issue, you know what I'm saying? So
yeah.
maybe it's not that we're having to necessarily say, oh, I'm not going to fund housing, I'm doing this,
Yeah.
but maybe it's the because I know like on that housing call, they were saying 500 people a week are calling it, but they can't get that the process is so backed up. So that need for those liaisons or navigators is just absolutely overwhelming because, and it's not that the money's not there, the money's there, they just don't have enough people resources to get people to the, so I think we might want to think about it a little bit differently and not so much like a program, but like processes.
Okay, that makes a lot of
Capacity
sense.
building,
Yeah.
so to speak.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense, and I completely agree with what you're saying. So, Holly, what did you capture from that?
I wrote back with these recommendations.
It's okay. We can. Oh, you need the microphone.
Sorry, yep. We will use a variety of RFPs, ITNs, and prize money model to solicit innovation program service delivery models. We will not attempt to fill all holes, but rather determine highest need and use a targeted approach to prioritize funding. We will prioritize a PR campaign focused on connecting families to services and potentially exploring funding a navigator-based model with partners.
Perfect. I like that. Very good. We've used navigators. I use care coordinators in my mind. Someone who is connecting people, services with the individuals. Okay.
Just because I was in the outside room and then I stayed after all of the focus groups because we couldn't let these families who said that they had all these needs, and there's this beautiful kind of peer camaraderie thing that popped up. And that's the term that the people were using in the rooms. Like, if I could just have someone to help me navigate this. And I know like Healthy Start care coordinators, it's called that, but that was the term that the people were using. And some families that were sitting there were like, oh, you don't know about this? You don't, and so it's everything that Ms. McFadden just shared for sure. But that was the term navigators that they were using.
It's a very common term. We have disease-specific navigators in healthcare.
Awesome. Okay, question number 3. Will we require cost reimbursement or establish a mechanism for a % upfront?
Why don't we look to Liz? since
Yeah,
she
no,
has the most experience.
Very strong feelings.
No,
on
please,
this.
I'd love to hear you.
So many of the nonprofits in town right now have cash flow issues. I can't even tell you.
Okay.
Like, please do not make them do cost reimbursement.
Okay.
I love what the United Way does. I just saw people go like this. It was really nice. Yeah, I love what they do, and they put the money out and then have a quarterly review and stop the funding if you need to, but get the money out to them
Do what they need
on
to
a
do.
monthly, so they can do what they need to do. If we want to do an advance, that's fine. Actually, I think sometimes the advance hurts them because they have to end up paying it back later and they haven't saved the money. But I do like saying incrementally, give them
Okay.
a certain amount every month,
Okay,
and then on a quarterly basis, do a test.
evaluate. Okay, that makes sense. Is anybody opposed to this?
I think
Oh,
one of the other things you might want to consider that some of our other CSCs do is they use units of service. And so they identify what a unit of service cost is at the very beginning, that brings in their admin, their facilities, their counselor costs, right? And then they just say, you know, we are funding you for 125 units of service. And that comes in a really nice package that is basically when you're truing up, did you provide that unit of service? Where's the documentation on it? And then obviously then you have the program outcomes. But that is another mechanism as well, instead of just pure cost reimbursement, is really potentially looking at a
Yeah,
unit
and I
of
want to
service
say,
model.
I'm not talking about cost reimbursement at all. I'm talking about deliverable, meet your deliverables, or whatever you want to call them, units. But CHSP, which we didn't get into as much, it drives every nonprofit in town crazy because every single kernel has to go back to like meet what they said they put in their budget. Versus let's just have the people get done what they say they're going to get done and treat them like grownups.
okay. Yes, please.
To a entity that needs the service, and it follows that person versus going to an organization. So this is this person who needs this, and this funding follows them. I just want to throw that out there just so we've got all the information as we're thinking about. And that is so raw, very raw, not thought through. There's no process behind it, but that's something that I know
It's
is
an option.
swirling around.
Sure, but still in that case, the money is still given to them to provide the service to that individual. They're not waiting till later to get those dollars, correct, for that individual. She wants you to use this.
Really, what happens is, in my mind, there would be a mechanism that tracks that family or that person.
Okay.
And so as they go and get the service from wherever they get it, then that money goes to that
organization.
entity.
Yeah, okay. All right. So to answer this particular question, I think we're taking cost reimbursement off the table. And we would like for us to consider our funding mechanisms to allow them to get the money incrementally upfront. Well, not prior
Not
to,
upfront,
but as based on deliverables or units of service, correct? Okay, great. That's good. That works. Okay, wonderful. All right, we're doing good. All right, next question.
Just know that for summer, right, like you're probably, that 60 days is gonna go quick. So
Sure.
you might wanna make an amendment to that, like a month check-in, especially.
Okay, thank you. All right, will we hold back a set amount or percent to be dedicated for capacity building efforts?
First, describe what capacity building efforts means. I'm not sure. So.
So what we're saying is that would we hold back a percentage that would specifically be dedicated to building capacity within specific provider circles? So we know that we've got these providers, they do a good job or could do a good job helping us achieve this particular outcome, but there is a capacity issue. So a portion of the funding is held back specifically for capacity building, technical assistance, those types of things, not necessarily for service provision. Does that make sense?
So sounds reasonable, but just a quick question to Ms. Watson. What is your experiences? That's something that you would deem advisable based upon what you've seen with other CSCs?
Absolutely. And if you look at page 29, just on the funded program directory in Broward, they have a whole capacity building section. And it really is a thoughtful methodology where they work with the not-for-profit, or for-profit, whoever is going to deliver the services. They determine what is their need. Do they need financial accounting support? Do they need to just really become a 501c3 with the IRS? And they work with them over a period of 3 years to get them on deck. And I think it's really important, especially, when you get the needs assessment back, you might find areas where you have absolutely no service provider, right? Really ready to go. And you're actually creating or having an entity take on that initiative or take on or create one from new. And this is where capacity building is absolutely huge. And I also think it's where it kind of provides equitable opportunities depending on where these programs are located throughout the county. By having access to equal support, it shows that they're all going to be equally ready at some point in time. And these are some of your programs that people go to because they're trusted in their neighborhoods, right? They're trusted in their micro communities. And I think that that is really important to continue to lift up those providers and or have them partner and work with some of your more established providers to create those meaningful relationships. Because ideally at the end of the day, right, while you're talking about priority areas and targeted approach, what you really want to see is a whole systemic delivery system that comes together and everybody feels like they have their piece and part to play within that as it relates to children in the community.
So I think our answer, you have a question, Mark?
No,
Okay.
so thumbs up.
All right, so I think
Yes.
the answer to that question is yes. We want to reserve portions of our budgets or their budgets for capacity building. Okay, I think we have 3 more questions if we can. No. If you go to the next slide, there should be 3 questions remaining. All right, thank you. All right, first question here. Will we require all funded programs to be evidence-based or allow a set amount of or percentage to be dedicated to emerging practices and programs? Now, I have my preference to this answer, but I'd love to hear from others. Okay, I want to see innovation. I want to give them the possibility to be able to say, this is something that we would love to try. We don't have any evidence that this has worked before, but we believe that this will make a difference. Here's what we want to do. And we have portions of dollars set aside for that. Is anybody opposed to that? No?
I'm not, because that's how it works in my world.
It does?
Yes,
Okay,
yeah,
all right.
Innovation.
Okay.
is key
Right.
sometimes.
Okay.
And just a lesson learned, because I know we're on a timeline, is Palm Beach did have this, it has to be evidence-based, And what they found is they were actually having huge distribution of inequities in some of where their programs, and they had some locally grown programs that were amazing. And so when they moved away from evidence-based to emerging and helping and supporting, right, build these out. They saw and unlocked a whole cadre of participants that they hadn't touched before, which is really exciting for them, especially as they're working on equitable distribution of funding, making sure that there's equitable opportunities for all citizens in their community. And so they've really, and they're our heavy research community, right? When you go to Palm Beach, they're researchers. I mean, they have a whole research team, have really embraced this in a meaningful way and have been able to still ensure that there's outcomes, but help them get there with that innovation.
Thanks for sharing that, Leslie. It's nice to hear the validation of that. So thank you very much. Okay, the next question. Will contracts be for 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, or more? What are your thoughts there?
Yes, to all.
Okay, I completely agree. Anybody opposed to that? I think it really depends on the type of service, the program. And like you said, if it takes time for the outcomes, we need the time to be able to get to that. So we want to keep those options on the table. Yes.
Can you clarify, just in thinking about putting together boilerplate languages for contracts expedited for this year and the longer term, can you just briefly touch on that?
Okay, sure.
I know that Ms. Watson shared potentially that if you wanted to try to do some summer stuff, that maybe you test out just a 1 year cycle, and that with a long year, you say maybe we're going to start with a 3 year with a renewal every 2 years, or maybe Michelle, if you can just repeat that, and I can type it down.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really determined on when you get the needs assessment, where your areas that you have a ready provider with a ready need, and what their background is. It really is based on kind of that analysis in that landscape to determine what it looks. I think it's whatever is flexible for the CSC staff to be able to manage, but also be able to be good stewards of those dollars, is that delicate balance. And I think that they'll know that as long as in the contract language, it says you may be awarded a 1, 2, 3 year or 3 year contract with a max of 2 1-year renewals, they'll know. And that will also kind of gauge and guide your risk for monitoring and accountability, which is kind of your next question as well, is, out of the RFPs you get back, they might not all be the strongest RFP, but you can get those providers there with a lot of technical assistance and help.
Sure.
And so maybe a 1 year or 2 year contract so that they stay hungry,
Right.
is kind of the way to go and move forward, and not think that they don't have to really start performing till year 4 or 5. Not to say that anybody would do that, but still.
I think, as we move forward too, and we get more sophisticated, one of the things the federal government's moving more toward is, just because contracts shouldn't be the same amount every year, right? So if you're trying to build up capacity for an organization to handle something, you might want to do it over 5 years, but go down 20% each year, but they have to still meet the same criteria, right? And so they've had to have leveraged and brought in partners, and that's, it's more sophisticated than where we are right now. But I would just want to put that on the table, that I don't think we should go into it thinking that every contract has to be the same amount of money every single year.
Yeah, I completely agree with that.
And
No.
that's what,
Right. I think that's right.
and St. Lucie County does award 3 year contracts, but they renegotiate the budgets
Every year. Okay.
for their service providers.
So Holly, to specifically answer your question, I think for the expedited, I think we're still keeping on the table the option for 1, 2, and 3 years, depending on the type of program, the type of service that's being provided. And then for the long term, it's still 1, 2, 3. So we're still keeping the option for both groups, same amount of increments. Depending. Okay. All right. And then our final question, and I know we're at 5, but what are the specific accountability measures needed if we decide to allow for longer contract cycles? So I think we're talking specifically for the 3 year cycle type contracts, either 2 or 3 years, but what are the specific accountability measures we'd like to see?
I'm not sure it's measures as much because we don't know what we're measuring yet. I think it's reporting requirements. What are the reporting requirements?
Good.
Right?
Yeah. And you're gonna have to see, where you funded and where you're underutilized. Why is that? What is that root cause of underutilization? Is it a transportation issue? Is it where you're located? Is it your hours, right?
Yeah.
There are a lot of things that I think that are gonna have to be worked out because, this is experimental for the first year, especially, that will kind of lead you to kind of your own risk-based assessment. One of the things that Broward does, and I don't know if you all have seen the Broward board book, but it is a beautiful piece of work. It is, trust me, the blue sky where you all will get to in a few years because Broward has gone before you. But clearly, when every time they do their funded program budget, they say, how are they doing on their utilization rate? How many times they had to have technical assistance, if they're meeting their deliverables in a nice, beautiful snapshot that shows how their spending is going. And then the board is able to then ask questions based on that data to say, what do we know why, right? Do we know why it's underutilized, right? A lot of it was COVID, the year before, and some of it was location. And then the staff is able to say, based on conversations and technical assistance visits, this is what we've been able to identify. And this is the plan that we have to help support them in a different and meaningful way. And so I think that that's where that whole partnership conversation comes into play, is really making sure that there's the development of a relationship with the providers, not just necessarily the contract manager and contractee relationship, because this is so experimental.
Michelle, have any of the other groups done a good, so Sika and I had a conversation about, like, when we get started from the very beginning, how do we measure the ROI for each thing we invest in? Has anybody done a good job of that, or used a third-party contractor to do that analysis for them?
Yeah, so we are actually at fact about this year about to undertake one that looks at all children's services councils, because we've never done it all with the like methodology. So we are going to work on our own methodology from a state level investment, because we actually now serve more than 60% of the birth to 18 children in all of the communities that have children's service councils. But what I would say is that, yes, our communities have different methodologies for determining ROI. We're going to undertake, can we figure out a consistent methodology that helps support ROI? But yes, I can tell you that Broward, in their Broward board book, will basically tell you for every child that is not remanded into the child welfare system or has an open investigation, that saves the community about $18,000. And so when you take the number of participants, right, they're able to calculate their ROI on a pretty large scale.
Are they having the local university do that? Tax Watch? Do you know what group they're working?
I will get you information on that. I actually do not know the entities that done it, but they've done it for years. So they've had the methodology and then they just replicate it year after year. But like I said, I think that they also have the ability, I think you all for ROI is going to say, this is what it could potentially be. And then in 5 years, you will basically say, here's been the ROI after potentially 5 years, just because the first few years is going to be participant data only.
So I'm sorry, logistically, we are over time. Yeah. So we need a motion to can we extend this like 15 minutes? Okay.
We told the bailiff 5:30.
Okay. Okay.
We extend 5:30 and then get out of here a little early.
Okay, so why don't we make a motion to go for another 20 minutes, which will take us to 5:25, which should get us out the building by 5:30. Okay, and I understand if you have to go, right? We totally understand. So thank you for that. Pardon me? Oh, somebody make a motion, please. I'm going to make a motion that we extend this meeting to 5:25. Do we have a second? Okay, Carmen has seconded for us. Is any opposition to that? Okay, all right, we're good. All right, thank you very much. So we can go ahead and continue. So Holly, I wanted, what were you able to capture with regards to that final question? I don't think we are very specific as to, I think it just really depends. I'd love to hear.
I think the focus is more on reporting.
Yeah, right, I agree.
I think what when you earlier when we said, and I said put flexibility, I said as appropriate, consider the summer model. So earlier we said we will utilize a monthly allocation model and require quarterly reporting and evaluation measures as appropriate, i.e. consider the summer model.
Okay.
So I think that gives you enough flexibility as we're framing out each of these opportunities.
Okay, wonderful. Okay. Thank you all so very much. I know we went through this quickly, but I just wanted to make sure we had an opportunity to go through these questions and come to some consensus. We did review the timeline, and I guess I want to ask the council or the committee members a question. Based on the timeline that we have, do you feel as if we have everything that we need in place to be able to meet the timeline, to be able to get the expedited funding out the door based on the timeline that Holly has given us? Is there anything else that we need to bring to the table right now?
I guess the only question I have is I thought Holly's timeline looked great. I did not think we were going to do the summer, and I think that would be too fast to
do the summer. Okay.
I don't know, Sika, what's your thought?
You also think it's too fast?
Without staff.
I do.
Okay.
We have 2 staff.
Okay.
And we'll be presenting just a staffing plan for your review at the next meeting. We've still got to hire, and we need to have people in place before we even get into trying to develop the RFPs, develop the ITNs. I love the project. So it would be putting us in a real
Tough spot.
situation.
And I just feel like when we go back to see what we've done, if we haven't thought through how we're going to measure the success, and then you just put programs out there, and I am concerned about how much money is out there right now.
Yeah. Okay. See, and I guess I completely understand, and I don't want to nail y'all to the wall. I really don't. And I understand the lack of capacity right now. I guess, you know, what I want to see is if the needs assessment comes back and it says, you all have a real problem this summer and it really needs to be addressed, then I want the ability to say, is there something we could do about it? So I don't want to completely close the door on it, but I do want to consider the fact that it may be overwhelming. And if the needs assessment doesn't come back with fire red alarms, then that's something that we can wait for a little later.
So what I will say, and I feel comfortable saying, is if the needs assessment comes back and there are clearly some holes that we need to plug this summer.
Right.
We could look at an expedited one-time funding to close those holes.
Okay.
Simple contract, boilerplate contract, and be able to manage that. This is how much we're going to give you for that.
Correct.
This is what we need in return. So understanding that that's not going to fit into what our model will evolve and iterate.
Okay. I appreciate that because I don't want us to close the door on the summer programs and then the needs assessment comes back and say, y'all have some major problems. But if the needs assessment does come back, then we will bring this back up and say, what can we do to Band-Aid this right now to help these kids during the summer, one-time issue?
Which is, I think, what Michelle was saying.
Okay.
Yes, and I would contemplate an emergency funding pot as well, and even if it's not a priority. Michael comes through, right? And your families, you get a new landlord for
I think we discussed it,
right,
agreed
like
on it already.
all
The
of-
board's already agreed
yeah,
to
all of those
contingency.
things. And so what I would say is if you know the timeline is not going to meet it, put a little bit of money for beginning of after school and summer into that emergency funding for year one.
Okay.
And then I would do it that way. And so that way it, from a board policy process, it can kind of, and then have everybody else.
Completely agree. Okay. So my understanding, and so we can move forward, is that we are not targeting the summer programs this year unless the needs assessment comes back and there are red warning signs, emergency, that there's something that needs to be addressed for this summer. Are y'all comfortable with that?
And not even summer programs, if I will, needs. I think we're looking at the need and not necessarily a quote program. Not that a program could be excluded, but like Michelle said, if the need is, we need to get these kids off of the early learning, off of the ELC list, we can put money toward that.
Okay, fair enough. Thank you for that. Okay. All right, and then let's see, one other question before we kind of finalize our recommendations. So based on our discussion, what is going to be our approach with regards to?
This is the evaluation of the actual RFPs process. So we heard a lot about subject matter experts, how many panels. I believe United Way did a 3-step review with a letter of intent first. That's what this part is supposed to be about.
Thank you for that. And, you know, it was very helpful for me to hear from the United Way what their process was like, because it kept the committee, the committee members, the council members out of it. And it was volunteers or other people from the community that was actually evaluating those proposals and making decisions as to who are the appropriate funding. I like their approach. I would love to see us adopt that. To me, I think it works very well. Okay, any opposition to that? Okay.
And,
yes.
and what I would say is our other councils are happy to help on the technical component.
Okay.
Right? We will get, if you have an RFP that is aligned to somebody else who's already has the exact same need, we'll give you that. We'll give you the scoring metrics. And we can also pull from our program staff from all of our other CSCs on the technical aspects. What I would say is I would never use a full CSC funded review committee who doesn't know the community.
Yes.
So maybe you have a duality in the review process, right? The CSC that has seen the services put in place in their own community, look at a review, be able to point out maybe some unintended consequences or things that you might want to consider as the contract's moving forward, but then also a community review that looks at what does this mean for our community? Does it look like it fits? You know, that knows the community characteristics a little bit better. And I
Okay.
think with those duality, and if you can run them simultaneously, right, then it's just a calculation of those scores. I think you'll kind of get the best of both worlds.
Okay. All right. We appreciate you sharing that. And I think that would help us really be able to evaluate these proposals appropriately and evaluate, you know, who the appropriate funders, funding agencies will be.
You know what? I forgot something.
Yeah,
Now I'm
please.
just realizing. I think the RFI process we've been going through for the technology has been superb. And I wonder if I can back up and to the RFP, the ITN and the prize
Yeah.
in the RFI, because I do think we learned a lot from the technology one already and so much she's saying.
Okay.
So I think we should add that in because I think there are the benefit of issuing RFIs before we go into some of these fields are that we get national and really outside. And we've been able to bring in people that really haven't done much work in Tallahassee to give us feedback.
Okay.
And I don't know if they'll bid or not, but just getting that information has been hugely valuable. So
Okay.
if we can go backwards in that in the RFI.
Done.
Are you opposed to that? No? Okay. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Now it's done.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Thank you for that addition. Okay. I think we had an opportunity to go through. Oh.
Sorry, I just in thinking about what I wrote is we will use external partners and volunteers, including experts from other CSC communities to evaluate proposals as like the recommendation. The question I guess I was wondering in terms of just because United Way shared it, they incorporated a letter of intent process. There was a 3-step review process. And I'm just curious, I know when we did you were very familiar with our ITN
Yes.
process.
Right.
And I know that we'll probably have an evaluation process that is a little bit unique depending upon if it's an RFP, an ITN, or RFI, or the prize money model. But is there this idea of the letter of intent? Is that something we want to incorporate? Or am I diving way down into the details too much?
No. I didn't think we were going to go there, but I don't want to take it off the table. I don't think it's needed for every single opportunity or every single program, but I think we want to keep it on the table as an option to include if we feel as if it's warranted and we can gather information from it. Is anybody opposed to that? Does that work? Okay.
I was just going to say, I actually like that. And
Okay.
I like having the option of that,
Okay.
particularly as we get into larger funding cycles. And the
Yes.
reason being is that you get all of the technical stuff out of the way.
Okay.
They're already approved agencies. It kind of goes back to that approved agency
Right.
type thing or approved organization. So not for everyone, but to have the ability.
Have the
would be good.
ability. Okay, wonderful. Thank you. So Holly, we have a few minutes. I'm going to ask you to just briefly review for us all of our recommendations. And I hope you all listen intently. Here's the opportunity to add to it or take from it. But at the end, I would like for someone to make a motion to either accept, let's approve these and take these forward to the council, or we're not ready for that yet. And I hope that's not the situation. But I just wanted to let you all know the intent is that we are going to approve these and then bring it forward to the council next week. So
if you give me one moment,
we will give you a moment.
This is the closest I can get it on the screen for you guys.
Okay.
So I'm going to read it, but we will use a variety of RFPs, ITNs, RFIs, and prize money model to solicit innovation and program service delivery models. We will not attempt to fill all holes, but rather determine highest need and use a targeted approach to prioritize funding. We will prioritize a campaign focused on connecting families to services and consider investing in a system of navigators with community partners and providers. We will utilize a monthly allocation model and require quarterly reporting evaluation as appropriate. Oh, that's where it's supposed to say consider model. And you guys can explain that on the day of the event. Consider using the unit of service model. We will reserve a portion of the funding to fund capacity building in the longer term funding cycle to provide very specific support and technical assistance for organizations. Consider the Broward model. I just wrote that down for us, sorry. We will designate a minimum percentage of funding to support innovative practices and emerging practices and not dedicate 100% to evidence-based approaches only. We want to have a mixed model of contract terms that allow flexibility of 1, 2, or 3-year terms with very clear parameters. I did not finish that. My apologies. I'll work on that. Set forth for accountability is what it's supposed to say.
Okay.
Contracts will communicate that contract budgets will be renegotiated each year based on contract performance reporting and QI plans. We will establish relationships with each of our investment partners and not just serve as a cut and dry contract manager. We will limit expedited funding this year for a one-time funding and or emergency funding to be considered separate and apart from the regular funding cycle and process we are developing. We will use external partners and volunteers, including experts from other CSC communities, to evaluate proposals. There may be a need to use a letter of intent process as we move forward.
Okay, that sounds good. So did Holly capture everything that we discussed and what we agreed to? Any opposition to that? Do I hear a motion to approve these recommendations to move forward to the council next week?
Yeah, I'll make a motion to approve what has been mentioned.
Okay, all right, thank you. We have a motion on the table.
Second.
And we have a second. All right. Anybody disagree? I don't think so. Okay, great. All right. Wonderful. Thank you so very much. So these are the recommendations that we will take back to the council for them to consider and to vote on for some of our processes as we evaluate these investments into these different programs.
Could I just, as a point, I think it would be great if Holly actually, like, you had some things that were there for us, right? Maybe just pull those out for the council meeting.
You're going to clean that out, right?
Yeah, that's
Holly?
what I meant,
Okay, yeah, right. Yeah, she's going to clean
There's
it
just
out.
a little,
Yeah,
a lot of details.
I know. She's definitely going to clean that up.
Yeah, exactly.
She's going to pull those out. Okay, wonderful. Thank you very much. Okay, let's move forward. So our next meeting will be on Thursday, February the 17th at TCC, not here. So I want to, because I've gone to the wrong place before, so I want to make sure you all are in the right place. And then again, we will meet on March 24th, once again at TCC. That's when the council meets. We're going to meet Thursday, April the 7th at 3 o'clock at TCC. And I just want, and you will send out the,
It's actually not at TCC. On the 7th, we're going to be at the City Chambers in the Tallahassee room.
Where's that?
Yep, a whole new place. It's very close to where we did the trim hearing. So you're going to go to the same place where we did trim over at the city of Tallahassee, but instead of going into the City Commission chambers, you're going to keep walking down the hall, look at everyone's lovely photo on the wall, right into the Tallahassee room. That's for our committee.
Because I was sending everybody to TCC. Okay,
That's okay. And I did update your calendar invite to include the 300 South Adams.
Okay, wonderful. So that's what we will be on April the 7th. So I just want to make sure you all have those marked on your calendars. Okay, at our next meeting, when we do convene, we're going to review the gap analysis, the draft gap analysis. I am so excited to see that and to see exactly where we are for the expedited funding, as well as the interactive dashboard for the program inventory. So, if you can, please mark your calendars. I think that's going to be a fun meeting, and QQ will definitely be there to give us some insights for that. We will get these recommendations. We will bring them back to the council, and the council will have an opportunity to see them prior to us making recommendations for the expedited funding. So just know that, there's a lot of work that's coming up. Before we go, do we have any thoughts or comments from any of the council members, the committee members that are present?
I just think the recommendations are very flexible. So I'm always in this rigid climate that it has to be this way. So there was a lot of flexibility.
And you like
I
that?
appreciate that. Yeah.
Awesome. All right. Thank you very much.
I won't be at the next council meeting.
Okay. Oh, okay. Well, you're excused. We totally understand that. But will you be able to attend our next committee meeting? Okay, wonderful. We're excited about that. Thank you very much.
And I too will not be present at our next meeting. I won't be in Hawaii.
The council meeting?
The council. So
Okay.
The 18th is our next meeting.
The
17th.
17th.
Yeah, I won't be here on the 17th.
Okay.
Oh, no, and you'll need a quorum, won't you?
So I don't know if anybody else says, we need 6 for a quorum. So that's 2, so we're down to 8. So my question would be, and just assuming we have a quorum, If you want to submit anything to be read into the record regarding your service on this committee, that is something that you can submit in advance and we can publish it in the packet if that's something that either of you would like to do. You cannot, for example, call a member of one of your fellow council members and say, we had this great meeting and this is all the things we did and these are the things I love and these are the things I'm concerned about. But if you would like to submit something in writing to be read in the record before any type of vote or decision is made, that is your prerogative, as long as we receive that in advance and am able to publish it along with our packet. So I would need that by Tuesday.
Awesome. Thank you very much for that. And with that, I do want to thank you so very much. You were invaluable to this meeting. I appreciate your time and sharing your expertise with us. Special thank you also to our surprise guests. Really appreciate your comments today too. Thanks again. With that,